Hello, everybody. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how's it going?
Okay, how are you?
I'm good.
It's been a long day at Laughing Place. So we had Josh tomorrow giving presentations at 6 in the morning. We had like 18 different embargoes lift today. So it's been a busy day. But we're here to talk about Mr. Magoo.
A little known film in the canon of Disney movies.
So I saw this in theaters. It didn't last long in theaters at all. It was like pulled pretty quickly, but it was with 97. So I was about 15. So I would have gone to like every Disney movie pretty much opening weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember enjoying it as a kid. I was a huge Leslie Nielsen fan just because I loved Airplane and Naked Gun and stuff. And I was excited that this isn't his only Disney work, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But seeing it again, there's some stuff that just makes me sort of uncomfortable. And now Agnes in this film, I don't know who portrayed Agnes, but is magnificent in every scene. I said Angus.
Angus the dog.
Yeah. But otherwise, it's definitely in the vein of like an Inspector Gadget. It's not quite as self-aware as like a George of the Jungle. It doesn't break the fourth wall or anything like that. But like, the sort of mid-90s screwball Disney comedies like Rocket Man. I'm trying to think of some others.
I put this in that category with My Favorite Martian as well, which wasn't based on a cartoon, but it was based on a TV series. This was just this weird like late 90s era where they'd kind of exhausted the First Kids and the Man of the Houses in their archive of scripts to be greenlit, and just started saying yes to anything that was a TV show. And Mr. Magoo came out of that.
So, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't remember seeing it in the theater, and knowing now that it came out on Christmas Day and it only lasted in theaters for 2 weeks before Disney pulled it due to controversial reasons. I'm thinking I didn't see this in theaters. I know it's a Disney film that I didn't own on VHS from the 90s, which was rare because usually I was like, it's Disney, I want to own it. And with Mr. Magoo, I feel like we rented it once from Blockbuster and that I didn't love it enough to want to see it again. It's weird. I mean, it definitely has... It very much relies on slapstick, which so did George of the Jungle and so did Inspector Gadget. But I feel like what Mr. Magoo is missing is more of the fantasy element. Obviously, it's an outrageous jewel heist movie where he's kind of accidentally part of the plot. But it's nowhere near as solid of a film to me as George of the Jungle, which would be my favorite of the animated TV shows turned movie by Disney in the late 90s.
And, Justin brought up a point about how he really enjoyed the movie as a kid. As I said, I enjoyed it too as a kid. I was a little older than Justin probably was, but it was definitely, it was just funny. It was silly. It was goofy. And I enjoyed silly, funny, and goofy. Justin also brings up a good point that in the 90s, they looked at outside TV animation for inspiration. And if you look sort of back to that era, now there wasn't, Disney wasn't the franchise machine it was. And they also made more movies back then. George of the Jungle was they were going to make these sort of big comedies. And that's, it wasn't until really, Bob Iger came on that they really slimmed down the slate. But
well, I always saw it as kind of Disney following the lead of what had been established elsewhere. Paramount did the Addams Family movies and the Brady Bunch movies. Universal did Casper the Friendly Ghost, which I think was like 94 or so. And Disney starts pumping these out about 3 years after, Casper. And I think they saw what happened with Casper and said, here's a good money-making formula. Take a animated series that parents who have kids now will remember, make a new movie based on that parents will have a connection to and take their kids to see. And I think that was kind of their game plan. Really with the three. Obviously, Mr. Magoo is the one out of George of the Jungle, Inspector Gadget, and Mr. Magoo that never got direct-to-video sequels either. Controversy aside, which I didn't even know about when I was a kid, I remember not even questioning it when George of the Jungle 2 and Inspector Gadget 2 came out.
Well, and Inspector Gadget's a little bit of an interesting situation because Disney owned Inspector Gadget because ABC owned Deke.
Mm-hmm.
And so they owned it. That's also where you get Meet the Deedles from, because that was a Deke property.
Oh, I didn't even realize that was a cartoon before it was a film.
I don't think it was a cartoon. I think they were developing it as...
That would make sense then, because a funny thing about Meet the Deedles, which I believe is on Disney Plus, is in Canada, Disney doesn't have the home video rights. So it was put out on DVD by another company in Canada. It still opens with the Walt Disney Pictures logo, but Disney doesn't have Canadian home video rights for Meet the Deedles.
Yeah, Meet the Deedles was Deke's first live action film. The director, Steve Boyum, actually went on to do Johnny Tsunami, Stepsister from Planet Weird, Mom's Got a Date with a Vampire, Motocrossed, and stuff like that. So
a lot of good times.
Yeah. Well, it worked out for Kenny Ortega. He had some failures at the box office, went to do some decoms, and then became a thing again.
Absolutely. Also, I would say his failures at the box office mostly became successes later on.
True. And Meet the Deedles nor Mr. Magoo would. And Disney even released Rocky and Bullwinkle, and and they did a lot of that. They did Alvin and Chipmunks because at the time their home video apparatus was so strong that they would license out a lot of things like Alvin and Chipmunks that they didn't own, but they were able to get it into stores. And so sort of, now with all these different streaming services, we kind of think of the world as, okay, Disney has its little group of franchises, Warner Brothers has theirs, and so on. And, they kind of keep it all in their family, whereas that wasn't the case, particularly in the 80s and then even into the 90s. It wasn't really till the very late 90s where people were like, oh, you know what, we should just focus on our stuff. But it's and even, Lone Ranger was a DreamWorks franchise, DreamWorks Animation, which is now part of Universal. So, even towards the end of the Dick Cook era, they were still trying to find ways to bring franchises that weren't Disney into the fold. Because, now Disney has Marvel, has Star Wars, has Pixar and Disney Animation kind of just churning constantly. And they only release, 8 to 10 movies a year. I mean, in a normal world. But you're even seeing a little bit of this kind of thing with Disney Plus, where they're licensing stuff out for Disney Plus that isn't necessarily now it's not usually branded, but you have like Clouds was a Warner Brothers film,
Black Beauty coming up,
and even Hulu, which is Disney owned, obviously, is Friday's debuting the next season of Animaniacs, which I'm sure if Warner Brothers had their druthers would now be on HBO Max if they had seen the future.
Well, Animaniacs, I would say, at least started as being produced for Hulu. Something that wasn't, that we're getting soon, that I got to screen recently, and I don't think I can talk about it yet, was Happiest Season, which is a holiday film that was meant to go to theaters later this month and is now going direct to Hulu, and it was made by Sony.
Yeah, so, Leslie Nielsen stars as Mr. Magoo here. I say he does a fine job as Mr. Magoo. I don't think this film's problem are with Leslie Nielsen, but he has two Disney works I'd like to touch on. One is a movie called Spy Hard, which I believe was Hollywood Pictures.
Yes.
I get Hollywood. I get Hollywood and Touchstone confused sometimes. But it's a spy film in the spirit of Airplane. But what I find interesting about it is as a joke, they use the Team Disney building as like the headquarters for some secret agency, and so some guy gets knocked off through the Seven Dwarfs building and lands in the reflecting pool, which is where the Legends Plaza is today. So I don't know. I don't know if it was successful or not. It's kind of hard to tell, but to me, it has a theme song. It has like a James Bond style theme song, as sung by Weird Al Yankovic at the beginning. So and then also I think when I hear Leslie Nielsen, what role comes to your mind?
Well, I mean, first Airplane.
Oh,
but I mean, I know him later in life from Swamp Fox.
Sorry. When they did the premiere of Spy Hard, they got everyone into the theater, and they just starting the show with they started running the beginning of Swamp Fox, and then like Leslie Nielsen came out and was like, "No, what are you doing?" And like it was like a whole gag that they did bringing back Swamp Fox.
He did 2 Wonderful World of Disney movies from the 90s resurgence. There was Safety Patrol, which started
that one.
Bug Hall he was Alfalfa in the Little Rascals movie for Universal, which also I would throw into this. Casper, Little Rascals, Disney was probably like, we got to get in on that. And then also Santa Who, which I don't think Disney owns the rights to anymore somehow. But that was basically a film where Santa, played by Leslie Nielsen, gets amnesia and forgets who he is.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
No, actually, I should just waited a second. If I waited, I know this.
I was going to say,
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
I was looking at it when you
I missed it. I was looking at Bug Hall, because who names a kid Bug Hall?
Oh, yeah, he was also in Get a Clue. But Leslie Nielsen was also.
Simon and Milo comes up every day for me now. Okay, yeah.
Leslie Nielsen was also in some of the Scary Movies, which were released by Dimension Films, which I think was a division of Miramax and left with the Miramax departure. Yeah. But at the time of their release, they were under the Disney arm.
So, what's your favorite Leslie Nielsen Disney project?
Probably gonna say Swamp Fox. Which Swamp Fox is what taught me that Leslie Nielsen had a non-comedic career before Airplane.
Yeah, it's funny because you look back and like part of the joke was that he was a serious actor playing Goofy, but we just knew him as a goofy actor after that point. That part of the gag is kind of lost to time.
He was also surprisingly debonair in his youth. To me, he's one of those people who like I thought of as always being old, because he had gray hair, probably young, like Steve Martin. So like when I looked at Airplane as a kid, I was like, that guy is old. But then when you see Swamp Fox, it's like, oh wow, he was young and handsome.
It's not quite Wilford Brimley level though.
No.
I feel it's funny. It's kind of like you watch Swamp Fox now and you start laughing because like you expect it to be funny, and it's not really. But I mean, it's not like a dirge by any stretch. But what was it? I had something to say about Swamp Fox and Leslie Nielsen, and I'm losing it.
He knew Walt Disney as a result.
Justin used to confuse Leslie Nielsen with Steve Martin. I can see that.
I could see that too. Now, interesting about the Mr. Magoo movie that I had forgotten because I haven't watched it since VHS times was, I guess this was the theatrical debut of Jennifer Garner, who when we saw in the opening credits, I was like, what is she, like 12 here? Because she's someone I always think of as like forever young. Like I know she's has kids and is a very adult woman now, but I always think of her as like always in her 20s.
Yeah, it's interesting, and having Ernie Hudson here and the principal from the Goldbergs,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a who's who cast if you really think about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of these people just ended up kind of going on to do other things. But the principal from the Goldberg, Stephen Tobolowsky, I always remember him most from Glee, and he played a pretty crass character there. So that always sticks out to me whenever I see him in something.
They
You've also got Malcolm McDowell, who has never played a good guy, playing the like ultimate bad guy here.
I talked to you a little bit before we went on air. I don't want to bring it down too much, but I remember seeing this movie, and this is where I learned the difference between the CIA and the FBI. It was, CIA is international, FBI, and they don't work well together here. And so fast forward, and it's played for pure comedy. Fast forward to the 9/11 Commission, and you find out that that was like a major actual problem and not so funny in that situation. And I'm like, and I just remember being like, I've always kind of presumed that they didn't work together because I saw Mr. Magoo, which is a weird way to look at current events, but is true. I wish I could remember what I was going to tell you about Leslie Nielsen.
I don't know.
Oh, it's going to drive me up the freaking wall.
Well, what did you think of the plot? I mean, I think you had more exposure to the UPA cartoon than I did as a kid. So, because I would say this is my introduction to Mr. Magoo. Like, probably the first time I ever saw Mr. Magoo animated was the intro to this film.
Mr. Magoo is not a complicated. It's not like there's not a lot of layers to it. I mean, I would say even like, it's not quite Hanna-Barbera level or, where there's a lot of fun gags and stuff. I mean, it's basically he can't see, so he goes and does things thinking something is something else, and that's just the gag. I mean, that's all it is. There is no real plot, at least in the versions. Now, there's been plenty of versions. There's been a Christmas special, and I think as animation got a little bit more sophisticated, they probably grew with the times. But I wasn't also like a Mr. Magoo loyalist. Like I didn't, it kind of did what it was. So it didn't bother me. It just felt like this movie, it was basically just to get from gag to gag to gag. The plot is completely irrelevant.
Yes. And like, how well do you think a lot of the gags work?
Well, I think that's when the movie is funny, or at least I think that's the best part. It's when Mr. Magoo's not on screen that sort of becomes the problem. Like it's funny for him to go into a sarcophagus and think it's a phone booth, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I'm not saying it's like high art, but it's when his nephew plays a big role, I think, to ground the film. But I think they should have almost gone like full George of the Jungle and just, it doesn't need to have like a romantic subplot like that. Just make it silly and goofy. And I feel like they didn't go, that far. It had these action scenes, but where the Mr. Magoo, like the car chase, I think is one of the highlights. Mm-hmm. But when he's suspended from air, like that's not fun. Like that has nothing to do with Mr. Magoo. That's just always suspended from air. It's best when he thinks something is something else, and it doesn't need to be an action scene like the turkey scene, which was like all over the trailer. Like, okay, that's funny because he thinks, he's hearing different things. He's doing weird things to this turkey or chicken or whatever it is. And, that's where you're playing up in the Mr. Magoo-ness of it. And, I think that's part of my criticism for the Inspector Gadget movie too, is it not that I feel like you need to be slave to the source material, but that worked because it embraced the Inspector Gadget-ness of it. It didn't try and make it into just a typical family comedy like a Home Alone or anything. Yeah. It was just, that's why Inspector Gadget 2, in my opinion, is far superior to Inspector Gadget 1.
I agree. Inspector Gadget 2, the direct-to-video follow-up, was much more true to the spirit of the cartoon and even didn't show Claw's face and kind of...
Yeah, and in a way that I think made it better. Like, you gained nothing by seeing Claw's face. Not that if, obviously the MCU changes things all the time, but they find a way to keep what makes it true, like makes the core of its DNA and changes the rest of it to make it fit a movie. It's not a slave to the material, but it's not it doesn't make a Mr. Magoo. They don't make a Iron Man movie where Tony Stark is a pauper, unless that's the recovery journey is part of the thing. It's you don't make a Hulk movie where he's happy-go-lucky and doing song and dance numbers. Like you try and find the core, and I feel like that's if you're gonna why make it a Mr. Magoo movie if you're not gonna do more sight gags. I mean, that's a terrible pun, but that make it that's the silliness. I mean, in fact, the animated scenes at the beginning and end, like that's the best part. Not because it's animated, but because it feels like you're watching a Mr. Magoo cartoon.
Yeah, and what I think is kind of interesting, learning about the fact that people were offended when this came out at its representation of people with visual impairments, and Disney put a disclaimer after the feature before the credits. And Siskel and Ebert, in their review, they both gave it thumbs down, 2 thumbs down, but they said the only funny part was that disclaimer, which they thought was like nonsense. Do you feel like people were oversensitive to the portrayal of a nearsighted man stumbling into that when that's inherently what Mr. Magoo has been since he was created in the 50s?
Well, I feel like, I think that's part of the reason Mr. Magoo, I mean, I see he's being rebooted now, but I think that's part of the reason he sort of fell off in favor is you kind of, he's not an idiot. Mm-hmm. So he's smart, he's successful, but he just gets in these situations because he refuses to wear glasses. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it just comes across as a little mean now. I mean, it's hard for me to say. I mean, I wear glasses obviously, but I don't get these mad cap adventures when I take them off. But it just kind of feels like mean to him at this point. And part of it's live action. Part of it is because there's more physical harm. It's not just him kind of like a Goofy cartoon where he accidentally walks onto the wrong plank and goes up instead of down. And, everything kind of works. There's mayhem all around him and he never realizes it. In this one, there's crotch shots and there's all those sort of 90s hallmarks of 90s Disney movies. Mm-hmm. So I do feel it just sort of felt uncomfortable to watch it. Disney has this new sort of advisory board about cultural stuff. And, there's a balance to it that I think a lot of people have sort of lost on both sides. But one of the groups that they use is a disability group. And I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't that sort of disclaimer at the beginning of this movie because, not that he comes across as mean or, shouldn't be hired. The thing about the disclaimer is they shouldn't be hired. Like he's a successful businessman. You would want to hire Mr. Magoo. It's more about he's just, has a deficiency like many of us do and is doing nothing to do anything about it. And that causes him trouble. Where this is coming from someone who wears glasses. I can't drive without glasses. I don't, need someone to tell me how to drive. But at some point you're like, you almost, get frustrated with the nephew and it's like, you need to like do something. Like you need to have an intervention. It's not so much Mr. Magoo, but like, seriously, someone here's no one's fixing this problem. Mm-hmm. And it's live action. So it feels more real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Today he'd either get contact lenses or laser eye surgery. Yeah. I mean, and it's a fine line between. It's kind of like how sometimes when Goofy, like some episodes of Goof Troop are kind of hard for me to watch because Pete just keeps kicking Goofy, like when he's down, it just becomes mean. Mm-hmm. And it's not so much it's insulting. It's just not fun to see someone be kicked when they're down.
Makes sense.
But it's funny. I feel like there's this hole in so many people, even people live through it like we did, of these 90s movies. I couldn't tell you a dang thing about Meet the Martian if I had to.
My favorite Martian. It stars Christopher Lloyd and what's his name, Jeff Daniels from 101 Dalmatians live action, and he pretends to be his uncle, but he's a Martian.
Yeah, I like that whole era. Rocket Man.
Rocket Man is incredibly underrated. There's a lot of funny moments in Rocket Man.
Okay.
including a really good rendition of When You Wish Upon a Star.
Well, all renditions are. I'm surprised they were able to get the rights.
Please Rise for the national anthem.
So that's Mr. Magoo. I don't know if there's much more to say about it, except it made me miss Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah.
But our next movie is decidedly better, but still has the sort of storied history of planes. And Justin can't wait for the LP Movie Club of My Favorite Martian. I'm sure it's coming. But next week we got planes.
At some point, we will run out of new things. not
funny,
but new to Disney Plus.
This film is the only English language film directed by Stanley Tong.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to know what happened here, like how he got the gig. Not that he didn't deserve it. I'm no such, but like, what was the path? Like, what did you? And Dibby, the answer is no. I do not think there's time for Mr. Magoo 2. Electric.
You know what Mr. Magoo did make me want, though, is a pop culture episode that explains what happened to the Eggplant Mobile.
There's some choice picture car work in this between the Eggplant Mobile and the Studebaker. Like, I feel like I don't know what happened to him, but well, and that Ruby, that should be the one in the archives.
I want to know if like the Eggplant Mobile was like the same shell that was used for like the Dumb and Dumber Shaggin' Wagon and like any crazy giant vehicle van in like the 90s. If this
make me want a hot dog.
Because it looked like the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. Yeah.
Well, so it was a long day here at Laughing Place. We'll be back, as we said, next week with Planes, Fire and Rescue. But join us tomorrow.
Just Planes.
Sorry, that is right. Planes, not Fire and Rescue. Well, we might watch both just because whatever. But Planes from Disney Toon Studios. That used to be a thing. And we'll be back tomorrow. We got more craziness coming tomorrow. But our big show tomorrow morning, or I guess technically at noon, will be our Life Day celebration with a coast to coast Life Day celebration with a lot of fun silliness planned. So grab your little VR units. I'll get my B. Arthur impression ready, and we will be celebrating Life Day as Lego Star Wars Holiday Special hits Disney Plus. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.